Hey guys, today I'm going to show you how I knitted my very first cable vest. Knitting a cable is actually very easy once you know how it's done. This vest has two types of cables as you can see. The first one is this very commonly used twisted kind of cable. We have 4 of them here. The center cable that I used is called braided cable. It looks a bit different from this one, but the technique is actually the same. So this is the yarn I was using. I used 2 balls and a little bit more. I used 1 ball for each panel, so 2 balls, 2 panels. And for the neckline, I used a little bit of a 3rd ball. This yarn is super bulky, so that's a weight 6, and it calls for 9mm needles. So for the main pattern, which is the cables and everything, I used 9mm. And for the ribbing, including the bottom ribbing and the neckline ribbing, I used 7mm, so 2 sizes down. Okay, so about the gauge, it says 10 stitches is 10 centimeters, so 1 stitch is 1 centimeter, but this is for measuring stockinette stitch only, which is just plain knit stitch. But as you can see, we don't have stockinette stitch. We have cables and rib stitches and some purl stitches, but that's it. So that just means we're gonna have a different gauge. We can't really use this. If it's plain stockinette stitch, everything is gonna be flat and relaxed. But with rib stitches, as you can see, the stitches are pulled together. The same thing happens with cables. So that just means I need to cast on more stitches to compensate for that. So the structure of the vest is just 2 panels, front and back, and then join them together at the side seam, then work your neck. So when we cast on, we're going to first cast on the width of just 1 panel. I'm beginning from the bottom ribbing, so I'm using my 7mm to cast on. I want to do a stretchy cast on, but I also wanted to have an invisible edge. So the cast on I'm going to use is called alternating cable cast on. We're going to first make a slip knot, place it on the needle, so first I'm going to insert my needle in this loop and bring yarn around the working needle as if to knit and pull this through. And then I'm going to place this loop onto my left needle by using it to pick the stitch up like this. So this is just a setup. For this cast on, the first loop is a purl stitch and the second loop is a knit stitch. So from here, I'm going to continue doing a purl stitch and then a knit stitch, then a purl, then a knit. So we just did a knit stitch. The next stitch is a purl stitch. To do a purl stitch, I'm going to go behind the yarn, insert my needle between these 2 loops like this, and then yarn over and pull this loop through between the 2 stitches. Then again, I'm going to put this loop onto the left needle by picking it up like this. So that's a purl stitch. To do a knit stitch this time, I'm going to insert from the front between the 2 loops. Yarn over as if to knit, bring that loop through, and then place it onto my left needle. And then I'm just going to keep repeating these 2 steps. So that was a knit, the next one is a purl. Bring the needle behind the yarn, insert between these 2 loops, yarn over and pull it through. and then bring this loop onto the left needle. Sometimes I just use my hand. The next one is knit. Insert needle between the first two loops. Bring yarn around. Pull it through. And place it on the left needle. And then I'm just going to continue alternating between a purl and a knit stitch. If the tail is at the back, the next stitch is a purl stitch. If the tail is at the front, the next stitch is a knit stitch. So tail at the back, cast on a purl stitch. Tail at the front, cast on a knit stitch. So 90 stitches of knit 1 purl 1 is about 65 centimeters, and this is roughly one panel's width. So like I said, I cast on 90 stitches beginning with the purl stitch, so that means the very last stitch is a knit stitch. We're going to knit a knit stitch. And then the next stitch is a purl, so bring yarn to the front and purl this stitch. Bring yarn to the back and knit the next stitch. Yarn to the front and purl. So I'm just going to repeat this knit, purl, and all the way to the end. So finish row 1 with the purl stitch, and then just turn your work. Repeat the same row again. From this side, that purl stitch is a knit stitch. So you're just gonna begin with the knit stitch again, and then alternate between a purl and a knit stitch. Keep working this one row to make the ribbing. So I did 10 rows of ribbing. Each loop is one row, and the loop on the needle doesn't count. So now I can start working the main pattern. I'm going to switch to the recommended needle size, which is 9mm. So this is an 8-row repeat pattern, and we're going to begin from row 7. So the stitches on the very edge is a knit 1 and a purl 1. I'm going to separate each section with a marker so you can see clearly. My stitch marker doesn't fit on the needle, so I'm going to use these threads. Okay, so the next section is the 5-stitch rib, which is knit 1, purl 1, knit 1, purl 1, and knit 1. So knit, purl, knit, and then you do 2 purl stitches before we move on to our first cable. Just let me put a marker here. So this is a 6-stitch cable. We're going to first knit these 3 and then come back and knit these 3, but these are in the way. So I'm going to slip them onto my cable needle. And place it at the back of my work. And I can go ahead and knit the next 3 stitches. and then come back, knit these ones, make sure it's not twisted, and knit them. It's gonna be tight, but you can just take your time. And that's it. The hardest part is done. So after the cable, we're gonna purl the next 2 stitches to separate it from the next section. And then from here, I'm gonna repeat these 2 sections. 1 rib section, including the 2 purl stitches, and 1 cable section, including the 2 purls. Also, mark your center 12 stitches for the braided cable. So I'm going to repeat those 2 sections to the first stitch marker here. So after that, continue with the pattern with the 5 stitch rib, then 2 purls, then your next stitch should be marked, meaning we're gonna do the 12 stitch braided cable here. So row 7, for this braided cable, we're gonna knit the first 4 stitches, and then do a cable 8 front. So that means we have 8 stitches here. We're going to slip the first 4 stitches onto the cable needle and place it at the front of the work. Knit the next 4 stitches first. And then come back and knit these 4. I'm gonna replace the stitch marker in this stitch, but just a row below it. So that's the center 12 stitches. For the other side, I'm gonna mirror this side. So we're gonna do 2 purls. Five stitch rib, two purls, six stitch cable. By the way, the 6 stitch cable, row 7, is always worked like this, with the 3 stitches on the cable needle placed at the back of the work. So after the cable, 2 purl stitches, then 5 stitch rib, two purls, and then 6 stitch cable again, two purls, then the 5 stitch rib, and then end this row with a purl and a knit. So that's row 7. That's the hardest row. Row 8 is super easy. You just need to work your stitches as they appear. The ones with the bump below it is a purl stitch. These ones without a bump, just a loop below it, is a knit stitch. So that's a purl, that's a knit, that's a purl, knit, purl, knit, knit. So you're just gonna follow the pattern. You're gonna purl a purl stitch, and knit a knit stitch. Next stitch is a purl, so purl this stitch, knit, knit, purl, purl. So this is all you need to do for row 8, and not just row 8, this applies to all even numbered rows. So row 2, 4, 6, and 8. So finish row 8, I'll see you at row 1, which is the first row of the repeat pattern. So with the foundation of row 7 and 8, row 1 and 2 are quite easy too. Whenever we see these twisted cable stitches here, we're just going to knit these stitches. The rest, we're going to work them as they appear. So again, that means knit the knit stitch and purl the purl stitch. And like I said, for the cable, including the center 12 stitches, because they are all knit stitches, you're going to knit them as well. So row 1, you're going to work to the end of the row and then turn your work, and row 2 is the same as row 8. Like I said before, for even numbered rows, just knit the knits and purl the purls. So I finished row 1. I'm going to mark it. That'd be the row below the loops on the needle. So now I finished row 1 and 2. Row 3, work your stitches as they appear, so no cables, no swapping stitches until the center 12 stitches. So for these 12 stitches, we're gonna first do a cable 8 back. So take the first 4 stitches and place them at the back. Knit the next 4 stitches. Then the ones on the cable needle. Then the last 4 as usual. And for the rest of the row, and also the following 3 rows, row 4, 5, and 6, super easy, just work the stitches as they appear, so knit the knits and purl the purls. So here I finished those rows. This is row 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And next we're going to do row 7. So row 7 is exactly the same as the very first row that we did right after the 10 row ribbing, except now it's going to be easier because we already have the pattern here. We just need to follow it. Row 7 is where we swap the stitches for all the cables. The rest of the stitches you can just follow the pattern, knit the knits and purl the purls. When you get to the first 6-stitch cable, just like before, slip 3 stitches, leave at the back, then work the cable. Do the same thing for the second cable. The center 12 stitches for row 7 is knit the first 4 and place the next 4 at the front of the work. Knit the next 4 stitches first. And then come back, knit these 4. And from here, we're going to follow the pattern, do the same thing. We're going to work the stitches as they appear. And for the 2 cable section, we're going to slip the first 3 stitches and place them at the back of the work and knit the next 3 first and then back to these 3. So that's row 7. And row 8, you're going to turn your work and work your stitches as they appear. So that was it. That's the 8 rows I'm going to repeat as the main pattern. Also, I want to continue marking my row 1 to keep track. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and my next row 1 is here. It doesn't have to be this stitch, it could be any one of them, but the point here is just to mark this row. So after the first 2 rows, I repeated row 1 to row 8 3 times before I decrease to shape the armhole. It measures about 10 inches in length, including the ribbing. So next, I'm going to do the decrease. The decrease happens every 2 rows, at the beginning and at the end of the row for row 1, 3, 5, and 7, so odd numbered rows. But the rest of the pattern from row 1 to row 8 is the same. So this is going to be row 1. Let me just mark it. The first 4 stitches, we're going to follow the pattern. So 1 knit, 1 purl, 1 knit, and 1 purl. And next, we're going to do a decrease over the next 2 stitches. On the right side of the panel, on this side, we're going to do an SSK. An SSK means you slip the next stitch knitwise and slip the stitch after it knitwise. Insert your left needle back into those 2 stitches like this, and then knit them as 1 stitch. And after the decrease, the next 2 stitches are going to be knit stitches. Doesn't matter what stitches we're working over. So bring yarn to the front and purl the next 2 stitches. And then that's it. So you end up having 7 stitches, and then from the next stitch, you can just follow your pattern. So knit the knits and purl the purls, no swapping stitches for row 1, just like the pattern. And then when you have 8 stitches left, I'll see you here. Now I have 8 stitches here. On this side, as you can imagine, I'm going to make it symmetrical to the beginning of the round. So I'm going to purl the next 2 stitches. Doesn't matter what stitches they are. And then I'm going to do a decrease. The decrease at the end of the row is just a knit 2 together. So just knit these stitches as if they were 1 stitch. And then the next 4 stitches, knit, purl, knit, purl, knit. So this is row 1. Row 2 is exactly what we've been doing, so just work the stitches as they appear. And remember the 6th column, it was a purl column, now it is a knit column from this side. And the last 6 is knit, that's a purl, and knit purl, knit purl. And row 3, we're going to do the decrease again. So again, I'm going to knit the first 4 stitches as they are. And then do the SSK again. So slip, slip, and knit. And then don't forget the 2 purls. This is row 3. So for this cable, we just knit each stitch. And for the middle one, we do a cable 8 back first. So slip 4 stitches and place them at the back of the work. Knit the next 4, and then come back, knit these 4, and then knit the last 4. At the end of the row, we're going to decrease again, so I'll see you there. So now I have 8 stitches. I'm going to purl the first 2, knit the next 2 stitches together, and then purl 1, knit 1, purl 1, knit 1. Row 4, again, just like before, knit the knits and purl the purls. And row 5, we're going to do it again. So the beginning 4 stitches is knit, purl, and then slip, slip, knit, and then 2 purls. You'll notice the second purl is the first stitch of the cable, but it doesn't matter here because on row 5 we don't swap the stitches for the cable. So I'm just going to purl these 2 stitches and then knit the cable stitches. And we don't swap any stitches here either. So at the end of the row, when you have 8 stitches, you're going to purl the first 2 and then knit the next 2 stitches together as 1 stitch, and then purl, knit, row 6, work the stitches as they appear, and I'll see you at row 7. So row 7, you're going to begin with knit, purl as usual, and then SSK, purl the next 1 stitch. Now don't forget this is row 7, so we need to swap the stitches. So we have 5 knit stitches here. I'm going to slip 2 and place them at the back of the work. So after the decrease, we only purled 1 stitch. Now I'm going to purl the next one. So purl 1 and then knit 2. And then knit the 2 stitches on the cable needle. And then work your stitches as usual. And then don't forget to swap your stitches here as well. And for this braided cable, Row 7, you're going to knit the first 4 stitches. So you have 12 stitches. Knit the first 4 stitches and then slip the next 4 on the cable needle. Knit the following 4 and then back to these 4. I'll see you at the end of the row. Okay, so at the end of row 7, we need to swap the stitches again. So the order of the stitches should be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then these 3, and then these 2. So that purl stitch should be this one, because you see that's the first 4 stitches, that's the decrease, that's the first purl, that's the second purl. So we slip these 3 stitches and place it at the back of the work, and then we need the next 2 stitches only. And then knit the first 2 stitches on the cable needle. So now we should have 8 stitches altogether. So we need to purl these 2. That's one. And that's the second one. Alright, so that's row 7. And row 8, you're going to knit the knits and purl the purls. So that was row 1 to row 8 with decrease 1 time. After this, I'm going to repeat these 8 rows 2 more times, but the next 2 row 7s won't be as complicated as this one because we won't reach the next cable within the next 14 rows. So I'll leave it to you. Decrease here on row 1, 3, 5, and 7. And don't forget to swap stitches on row 3 here and row 7 for all the cables, and do the 8 rows 2 more times like that. So this is the front panel. I did those 8 rows 3 times. I'm going to do it 1 more time, but at the same time, I'm going to shape the neckline as well. To make the back panel, you're going to start your panel in the exact same way. And then you're going to do those 8 rows 4 times before you cast off. So front panel, those 8 decrease rows 4 times, shape neckline during the last 8 rows. Back panel, those 8 decrease rows 4 times. So this is row 1 again, 3 times, and this is the 4th time. So what I'm going to do is leave these stitches at the center. You see this braided cable? I'm going to leave it and work my stitches back and forth like this, and at the same time decrease at the beginning and at the end of the row, just like we've been doing. So work like that for 8 rows, and then I'm going to reattach my yarn here, cast off these stitches, and then continue working on this side back and forth for 8 rows again, decreasing at the beginning and at the end of the row as well. So basically that's what I'm going to do. Ignore this pink yarn, this is just for me. So you're going to work your first 4 stitches as usual, knit, purl, and then again do the same thing, SSK. So the beginning of this row is exactly like what we've been doing. Then purl 2. So I'm going to work my stitches until I have 8 stitches here. So this stitch, 3 stitches before the 5 stitch rib. If you need to mark it, you can do that as well. So like this, 8 stitches here. My next stitch is still purl stitches. Just like before, we're going to purl the next 2 stitches. And then, just like the end of the row, you're going to knit the next 2 stitches together. So knit 2 together. and then you do your purl, knit, purl, knit. And then you're gonna turn and work in the opposite direction. And for this row 2, we're gonna knit the knits and purl the purls. I decided to place a stitch marker anyway because it was really hard to see. So row 3 is the same pattern. You're gonna decrease at the beginning of the row, knit, purl, and then SSK, purl 2, and then work these stitches as they appear until you have 8 stitches left before the stitch marker. So this one right here, you're gonna purl 2, knit 2 together, and then purl, knit, and then row 4, knit the knits and purl the purls. Row 5, just like row 3. Row 6, knit the knits and purl the purls. So I've got row 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Row 7 is actually the same as row 3 because we don't have stitches to swap here. And then when you finish row 8, we're going to cast off the stitches. So you're going to work your stitches until you have 2 stitches on your right needle. You're going to knit the knits and purl the purls. So the first stitch is a knit. I'm going to knit 1, purl the next one, and then bring my yarn back. Now I have 2 stitches. I'm going to pull the first one over the second loop. So like this. And make sure you don't pull it too tight. The next stitch is a knit, so I'm going to knit it and pull the first one over the second one. The next stitch is a purl, so bring yarn to the front and purl it, and then bring yarn to the back before you cast off this stitch. And then you're just going to continue doing that. And then when you get to your last stitch, you're going to knit it, pull your yarn through, and before you cut your yarn, leave some length so we can sew up the shoulders later. Okay, so that's one shoulder done. Next, I'm going to cast off these stitches first. So you're just going to work your stitches and at the same time cast them off. The first stitch is a purl. So I'm going to purl this stitch and purl the next one. Bring yarn to the back and then cast this one off. And for these stitches, because they're the front neckline, you really need to make sure they're not too tight. So you're going to work across the cable. Now we have 2 purl stitches here. We need to cast them off as well. So bring yarn to the front and purl the first one. Cast it off. And then purl the second one. And cast it off. So now I have one more loop here, but this stitch should be the very first stitch of the row. So that means I need to cast this loop off as well. And that's it. I've got my first stitch and the second stitch is a purl. So now I can just work my stitches as usual. I don't need to cast anything off. So that's knit, purl, knit, purl. But don't forget we need to do the decrease as well. So now this is the beginning of the row. At the beginning of the row, we do an SSK. And then purl 2. And then work your stitches as usual. At the end of the row, decrease as well. So this is row 1. When you finish row 8, you're going to cast off the stitches just like we did here. And then I'll show you how to join the shoulders. So I've got my back panel and front panel here. Now I'm going to join them at the shoulder seam. So make sure the right side of the cable is on the outside. And then I'm going to match the shoulder stitches. So first I found this one. It's just easier if I look at it from this stitch. So this blue stitch marker marks this knit stitch. And it also marks the knit stitch on this side as well. So I'm going to count backwards to find my very first stitch. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is number 5. It's marked. And here we should have 5 stitches as well. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Which is this little one at the very corner. I'm going to count that as a stitch as well. And also line them up on this side as well. And as you can see, my very last stitches are marked. And now I'm going to use this end to sew it together. So I got my yarn needle. So I'm just going to use the simple whip stitch. I'm going to go in the first stitch. And then straight to the first stitch on the other side and pull it through. And then just repeat in the next stitch. After that, you're just going to hide the yarn tail on the wrong side of the vest. For the side, I'm going to skip the ribbing, which is the first 10 stitches, and my stitch markers are in the 11th stitch. I'm going to need to attach this yarn. Now for the side seam, I'm going to use mattress stitch, and I'm just going to go in the very center of the purl stitches, like this. So when I get to the very first decrease row, I'm going to go back in the very same stitch, so I get to the wrong side of the vest. And then I'll just hide my yarn on the wrong side. So that's for the side seam. So at the beginning of the round, I'm just gonna place a stitch marker here to mark it. From here, we're just gonna work one knit stitch, one purl stitch, and then repeat. So I've done 10 rows here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And then I'm gonna stop here. And then you can cast off your stitches, but the cast off method we used before is not a stretchy cast off. So here I'm gonna use tubular cast off. It's another whole new technique and I happen to have a video on that. So I'm gonna link it to you, and from here you can just copy what I do in that video.